again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Random Vlogging, the show where I just talk about stuff that's interesting to me. Today, um, I I am not okay right now. There's some stuff that's going on that has messed me up majorly. Unfortunately, I can't actually deal with it the way I want to due to a lot of things outside of my control. So, um, I need to do something to take my mind off of it. So I'm going to make this video with a super clickbaity title. Um, I normally come up with the titles after I record the episode. I know what I'm going to name this one. Um, and it's going to be something along the lines of Hogwarts houses aren't real. Now, before people get all upset and angry with me because I'm being a gatekeeper or I'm, sh- sh- attacking people for just having fun, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not actually saying they're not real because they were part of a work of fantasy. D&D isn't real. However, it has an immense impact on people. And uh, you can discuss the merits of so many things in a D&D world without going to think, oh, well, it's not real, so it doesn't matter. No. From the idea that Hogwarts houses are real as far as the universe of Harry Potter goes. Um, that's not what I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to tell people that they shouldn't become invested and make themselves a part of fictional worlds that they enjoy. Um, I purposefully titled this clickbaity simply because this is a subject that I have seen a lot of people have very strong opinions about, and they don't actually understand what the real thing behind it is. And what that is the Hogwarts houses aren't real in the same way that the Myers-Briggs personality test isn't real either. Now, as soon as I say that, a lot of people are going to be either very confused or angry because the Myers Briggs or the Briggs Myers, I can never remember which name comes first, uh, is very well known. A lot of people not only know their four-letter diagnosis from this system, um, they will use it to predict how they're going to interact with other people, but based on their designation or diagnosis. For those of you that are unaware, and I'm actually going to look it up. Um, there we go. It's called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. And a lot of people assume it is a psychology-based personality typing test. It actually is and it isn't. And the reason I'm talking about it in relation to Hogwarts houses is because both Hogwarts houses and the MBTI were actually created almost the same way, with a few minor changes due to one is intended to be fictional and one is intended to look like it's based on and backed by scientific evidence. Um, so, for those of you who don't know, the Myers-Briggs type indicator is actually a test that is actually not based really, but it comes from psychology started by a psychologist called Carl Jung. Jungian psychology is an entire branch of psychology, and it's very interesting and fascinating. But one of the things it does is it deals with kind of motivations and things like that. And from that, a lot of psychologists started doing study into what's kind of referred to as personality typing, stuff like that. I believe it's also been mentioned as motivation study. I mean, there's a lot of things that break down into this, but the place that it's most common to see in just general society is this Myers-Briggs type indicator test, and uh, employment applications. Actually, if you apply for a job, and almost any entry level job for a large corporation in the U.S., you will take a personality test. And even their employment test, because they'll have a personality test, and then there's actual things that are specifically linked to employment, but they actually use the same research behind it to create both tests, and you actually won't be able to tell on the application which is personality typing and which is just employment and employability, unless you're familiar with the science behind it. But that's where it's most common. And the thing with the Myers-Briggs type indicator is Myers-Briggs um, explores four topics that basically make up your motivational makeup. Um, and I'm looking for the actual cut. Okay, here they are. So there's four what they call the dichotomies, and this is where you'll get your four letter type indicator. They are intuition versus sensing, introversion versus extroversion, feeling versus thinking, and perception versus judging. I'm not going to go into these specifics of what all these means. I'm just going to say that's where you get it. Um, uh, and what will happen is you will be, if you take this test, you will be found to be either more, like for the first one, intuitive versus sensing. If on the test you are shown to be more intuitive than you are sensing, you will have an N for your first letter. Because of that, there's two letters for each of the four categories. That makes a total of 16 total types that exist. All of humanity will fit into one of these 16 types. And that's what the test basically is. And each type actually has a name. And I'm trying to see if they actually have um, the names for them. And I don't. So I'm not going to look it up now. But basically, each one will have an actual name. Um, I'm gonna. Okay, I'm gonna. Okay, so something like the ISTJ personality is the inspector, or the ENTP personality is the visionary, and that's how all this stuff works. And it is technically based on Jungian psychology, and more specifically, what's called the Big Five personality types, which actually is based on real psychology, and I'll get into that in just a second. So that's what the I or MBTI, that's what it is. And a lot of people think that if they take this test, they will actually find out a lot about themselves and be able to better understand their own motivations. It's not actually true, and there's a bunch of reasons why. In the psychological community as a whole, um, the MBTI is known to be very inaccurate and not really worth anything from a scientific perspective for a number of reasons. The biggest of which is uh, it's based on the big five personality types, which is something that I'm again going to look up. Or big five personality traits. Those traits are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Um, and those were discovered through years and years and years of psychological research, looking at what actually motivates people to make decisions and what affects how their personalities actually take action. Um, what that means is they did a bunch of studies without having any of these words, without having any of these, and they just marked down, okay, these are things that motivated that people. These are things that motivated that people. Now, this is a lot more complicated than it sounds because, as I'm going to discuss in just a second, y- whenever you're doing motivation-based studies, you can't technically know for sure what someone's motivation is, why they're doing something, because the only way you can find out is to ask them or try and piece together their actions and come up with a an explanation that makes sense. But if you ask them, there's always going to be a bias involved, whereas a lot of people don't know why they do things. You ask them to justify it. They may give you the answer as they know it. They may get defensive and give an answer that either they want to be true, or they want, or they think you want them to say. It's a very complicated thing. Um, so that was one of the things they had to deal with, and that's why it took years and years and tons of money to come up with. But they have these big five personality traits that the psychological community generally accepts as being, for the most part, important. Not everyone agrees that big five personality traits is 100% sound science, because they can't. Psychology in general can't really prove things as much as you can in like chemistry or math, where you just add the numbers up and the numbers match, then it's true, and if they don't, then it's false. It's not how psychology works. We don't understand the brain enough. The reason this is important is MBTI uses the big five personality traits, but it leaves out one. Um, Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness are all part of those dichotomies. They literally just took each one and turned it into a dichotomy. Um, Neuroticism is not reflected in MBTI at all. And so, of the five major personality types that influence our decision making, they just left one completely out, because neuroticism is really hard to make a dichotomy of. All the rest are technically in the big five personality traits. There's spectrums. It's not you are one or the other on them. You'll have a degree of how open you are. You'll have a degree of how conscientious you are. You'll have a degree of how extra um, how much of an extrovert you are. Um, but it's all based on spectrums. And so introvert, two people that technically would be classified as introverts might have very different marks on the spectrum of extroversion. Um, and when you compare the two, you might actually, because introvert is technically a subjective term in this instance, you might be able to say, well, this person is introvert, and that person, in comparison, is an extrovert, or they're more extroverted than this person, despite the fact that they're both technically considered introverts. MBTI doesn't do that. There are no spectrums. I have seen tests where it'll say, well, you're 31% this, and that's why we said this, or we're 51% this. It's still the actual MBTI types are very much. There's only 16 kinds of people in the world. There's no spectrum, which we've found in general. Anytime, for the most part, anytime you claim something as either one or the other, without taking into the idea that there are spectrums and a lot of things, you're generally wrong. So that's one of the biggest issues the psychology community has with MBTI, is that it just completely throws away one of the big factors in what you should be doing, because it couldn't find a way to make it an either or. Um, the other issue that not only oh, and they also don't like the either or aspect. The other thing that's a little bit more well known, but people seem to just ignore, is your MBTI type can change drastically in the same day. Um, the test itself, and this is one of the reasons it was so hard to define the big five personality traits, and why they had to use a spectrum and everything. Because depending on your mood, um, your MBTI type will change. You can take this same test over and over again and get a different result every time. In the scientific community, if you repeat the same experiment and it comes up as a different result every time, or even a different result just half the time, um, that would indicate there's something wrong with the experiment. Because if you're doing the exact same thing and you're controlling all the variables, you should be getting this same result. Um, and what that means for the MBTI is it is a very subjective thing, and it's more of an idea of what you want to be rather than what you are. Um, and that's one of the biggest issues most companies have when they use these personality typing tests for employment. The goal was, and they spent millions of dollars to come up with these psychological tests they could use to predict good employees. Um, they're not accurate. They're about as accurate at predicting a good employee as a coin toss. And one of the big reasons why is when people take these tests in a situation where they're trying to get a job, they're going to say answers that they think the company hiring them wants them to say, as opposed to what they actually feel. Because of that, the tests are always flawed. The same thing is true about MBTI. Because people believe this is going to tell them who they really are inside, this is going to define them, they will answer in the way that they want to be viewed, instead of what they actually feel. And because of that, it's very inaccurate, and it changes. Now, why am I comparing it to Hogwarts House? Well, the reason it's inaccurate is the same reason why the Hogwarts houses, quote unquote, aren't real. It's because what they did is they started at the end and worked backwards. With the Hogwarts houses, uh, J.K. Rowling was writing an aspect of her book. She wasn't actually studying the psychology of the character of Harry Potter or Hermione or any of those. What she did was she created these houses, gave them traits that she felt would create a very easy separation and would help her with the story of her books, and then gave those traits to the characters that inhabited the house. If they were quote unquote real, what they would have done is the houses would have technically been formed by people with the same personality traits, just kind of clumping together, which is what they do. But that's not how it was built. In the lore of the books, that actually is how it was built. Each one of the heads of houses had um, things that were important to them, and they had basically chose people that also had those same things. But as an actual device, as it was created, it was done the exact opposite way, which is exactly how MBTI was developed. They came up with these dichotomies. They did the math on the 16 different things, and then worked backwards to find questions and tests that would sort people into these houses, basically these types. And that's why it's so inaccurate. That's why you can take a Hogwarts House test, and one day you might be Gryffindor, and another day you might be Hufflepuff or Slytherin, and it changes because the test was not actually designed to test you. It was designed to help put you in the place that the designer wanted you to be put. Um, and This same thing is true about the MBTI. The reason I bring this up is recently, I don't know if it's just because my social circles are interacting, but I have a lot of friends that are not only big Harry Potter fans, um, but are also very invested in the house system itself. And I've seen a lot of posts where they talk about, well, this is what real Gryffindors are like, and this is what real Slytherin are like. And these people are using these house of affiliations um, to make judgments about other people and what their core values are and things, and it's become this kind of a vicious thing about something that doesn't exist. And again, I'm not saying that, oh, it's just fiction. So no, the idea that you can base someone's um, personality on which house they were sorted into is factually wrong, because they weren't sorted into that house based on their actual personality or their motivations. They were sorted into that house because they chose the things that would get them sorted into that house. It has nothing to do with their motivation. It has nothing to do with who they are as a person. Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors aren't really a thing as far as judging someone and getting idea of who they are. They are literally just choices they made for a myriad of reasons. It might be that someone made the choices to be Gryffindor because they like the color red, or they like lions, or they like Harry Potter, or it could be that they don't like Slytherins, or they don't like Malfoy, or it could be that they have a friend that's Gryffindor, or it could be that they've met Ravenclaws that they just had an intense dislike for. All of these things will influence what they ask, because when they go into the test, they know they're going to be sorted into one of these four houses, and they know what qualities each house has. So whatever your house is, it's a choice. Now, can you make decisions based on people's, or can you make predictions about people's personalities based on their choices? Yes, you can, but a choice of which house to belong to doesn't actually mean anything, because again, um, the choice doesn't actually make any doesn't affect anyone. Like, if you were to base someone a judgment on someone based on a choice they did to punch someone in the face. Well, this person punched this other person in the face, so I'm going to choose that this is an aggressive, or I'm going to believe that this is an aggressive person that's solved his his or her or their um, conflicts by resorting to violence. Technically, that is a valid um, a valid conclusion to come to based on the facts. However, if you change just one aspect of the story, this guy hit that person because he was bullying another person. That changes everything. This guy hit that person because the first person was bullying the second person, and the second person stood up to them. Well, that's another different thing. This guy hit that person because the other person was armed and threatening him. All of these change it, and context matters, and the motivation matters. So when you look at your choice of house, even if you are being as honest as physically possible and you're really answering the questions as you feel as your core thing, you're still going into it knowing there are four results you can have, and you know what each house has. So the unconscious bias is part of your choice making process. There are very few people in comparison to all the people that take the tests. The people that get the quote unquote wrong house are very small, and that would indicate that um, these tests are able to give you what you want as opposed to what you actually are. And I go back to the MBTI. Yes, the same is true about MBTI. People will any test you take will have a little blurb about the MBTI, and it will talk about the four different dichotomies. That already is going to color your ability to take the test objectively. Um, and again, because the test was designed with the end in mind and not through research of actual people and then grouping them based on common factors and then giving those common factors a name, like it was with the big five personality traits, it is rife for inaccuracy because they did everything backwards. They decided on the solution they wanted and then worked back to find a question that would be answered by the solution they wanted, as opposed to starting with a question and finding a solution. It's a very common tactic in manipulation and debate and a lot of other things, but it's very, very inaccurate. So to kind of sum this all up, Hogwarts houses aren't real. Um, and I don't mean this as their work of fiction, you need to stop enjoying fiction. No, get involved, but understand your house is a choice, whether conscious or subconscious. It is a choice, and because it is a choice and not something that's just ingrained in you, you cannot make generalizations about all Gryffindors or all Slytherins or anything like that. Now, I know a lot of this is done just in fun. It's fun to think that it really is a thing. But because of the things I've seen recently on Twitter and that, and people getting very, very upset and defensive about their own houses to the point where they start not just disparaging, but actively attacking members of other Hogwarts houses, there are a lot of people that think these houses are real, that actually they say something about their character as opposed to just that they're a choice that they made. And the same thing is true about the MBTI. It's a choice. It's not real. And if you base your opinion on someone uh, on whether or not they're the mastermind or the counselor, none of them mean anything. They're choices, and they're highly inaccurate. To be honest, the reason the Hogwarts houses are more accurate than the MBTI is that MBTI has 16 possible outcomes. Hogwarts has four. So the chance of you getting the right house um, on accident is significantly higher when there's only four chances versus 16, by a factor of four, actually. Um, so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below. First of all, do you know your MBTI type? Um, and second of all, do you know your Hogwarts house? And have you ever actually based a decision or a viewpoint on either of those two things? I've found that it's actually a lot more common than I thought it was. For those of you wondering, I've never taken the MBTI test, so I actually don't know what any of the types I might be. Um, I do know I am Gryffindor at Hogwarts, and I've taken the test multiple times, and I'm always a Gryffindor. And when they give like the percentage of what you are, Gryffindor is always in like the high like 80s or 90s. Like I'm crazy Gryffindor, which is a choice. And I believe I'm a Puckwudgie for the American houses, but I've only taken that test once, and I was actually upset with it because I think there was another house that I actually wanted to be a part of. Um, but that's me, and none of it means anything. I'm, you know, I'm a Gryffindor that has panic disorder and agoraphobia, so I'm terrified to leave my own room. So how does that really, to deal with the idea of courage? Again, courage is different for different people, and I believe personally I'm very courageous. I just have some demons. um, so yeah, let me know what you think about this topic in the comments below. Otherwise, that's all for me, and I'll see you guys in the next time. All right, bye bye.